Welcome learners. This is our session on the global scenario and the global perspectives of media policy. So far we have learned about what are the objectives of media policy, what is a policy, what are the various instrumental reasons why media should be operative in a vibrant democratic society, and how media policy is different from communication policy and how together they strengthen the overall development of a nation. Now we are going to talk about the global perspectives of media policy. The important thing to consider here is the determinants of media policy. A nation's political, economic, religious and cultural considerations limit and demand the media to operate within those goals, and media's own views are immaterial. Time and again, as students of media, you would have learned about the fact that media does not exist in isolation. It is a subsection of the economic, the religious, political, social fabric of any country. In such kind of an aspect, we understand that media's role cannot be in contrast with the roles of all these various sections of the society. So it is immaterial to consider that media will be able to operate all on its own as a person who controls everything. This is not possible. So when we look at the school of thoughts of various media, one school of thought opines that the government authorities should lay down the nation's media policies that should be strictly adhered to by all media of mass communication. In order to bring about homogeneity in the operations of media, government usually wants that there should be a proper policy which everybody must adhere to. But looking at media from various aspects, say for example the national media or the regional media, this is not always possible. In contrast to this, there is a liberal school of thought, and this argues that the government should suggest some broad principles and parameters taking into consideration a nation's constitution, international relations, the national aspirations, national values, and customs and traditions and the cultural heritage. Within these broad guidelines, the media should be free to adopt, self-regulate, and observe these national goals and the global codes of conduct in performing its duties. Now there is a media policy in a parliamentary democracy. Free mass media play in open societies such as the USA, the UK, India, France, Germany, Italy, Australia, etc. have generally received popular support from people and government of those countries. But quite often one hears that even many democratic governments also deny information and keep public in dark. Keeping that in mind, in India, we came up with the RTI, the Right to Information Act. And with this, we were able to, even a common man was able to get the kind of information that one wanted to about the government setup, about various organizations that operate in any environment, so on and so forth. The fact should be highlighted rather than concealed, said the McBride Commission report. And this report asserted why it is important that the fact should be highlighted. Maximum number of times it is seen that people try to conceal, or even authorities try to conceal the facts, which only gives greater rise to suspicion and greater questions. So it is always important that facts be highlighted rather than keeping them undercover, rather than concealing them. Now let us look at what are the obstacles in India. There were several cases in India where public was not kept in loop about crucial national affairs, such as many defense equipment purchases, the deals made by Indian Air Force, the Indian Army. This also happened in the case of Bofors gun deal, the 2G scam, and the Colgate fraudulent transactions, etc. Though mass media have investigated and researched innumerable crimes and frauds, the crucial story leads were denied time and again by well-known government leaders and functionaries. So hence it is important that the obstacles in Indian context be dealt with in a more severe manner. Now there is a rigid media policy in many controlled societies of Western Asia, say for example the Latin America, Africa, and one-party governments such as Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, China and Russia. They all maintain a strict vigil on the existing media ownership, operations and performances. The fraudulent mass media policies, the government interferences in most of these countries have often created interminable obstacles in media organizations' routine operations. So, stronger the control of the government over the media policy and over the media organizations of the country, the more difficult it will be to let out facts in a democratic manner. Now, let us look at the obstacles in developing countries. So far, we talked about the more developed European nations, we talked about the Latin Americas and countries where there is a one-party control or a single autocratic control, single person's control. Now we are looking at the obstacles that they face in developing countries. Robin Mansell and Mark Roby have specifically underlined the following. 1. The technological innovations. 2. Institutional dynamics. 3. Democratization, and 4. Inclusiveness and plurality. Now those are the obstacles in developing country because people here think differently. The media acts in a varied manner. So our first obstacle is that technology has not reached everywhere. 50% of the total world's populations is still devoid of technology. So there still are the technological have-nots. Then there is an institutional dynamics that comes into play, whereby lobbying is an aspect of it, whereby how it invests into its own goods, into its own interests is important. Then democratization is one aspect. How much freedom of choice and how much freedom of expression, free speech is available in any society is also a matter to be questioned. And then we talked about the inclusiveness and plurality. When we talk about inclusivity, there are various sections of the population. It could be the queer, it could be the women, it could be the less fortunate ones, it could be the illiterate ones. We need an inclusiveness of everyone. And such sections of people who are deprived are more existing in developing countries. Alongside, plurality is an important aspect because that is what gives you greater variation. More opinions come into the media when there is greater plurality. Besides these, there are some other hurdles like denying or delaying grant of licensing to set up media equipment such as transmitting stations, studio services, channel broadcasts, printing plants, etc. Another problem is with the authorities who also very often maintain strict supervision on media persons, daily news reporting and investigating scams and feature stories. So in such kind of countries, they are not always free. Reporters are not free to investigate the kind of stories they want to work on. Reporters function under a constant fear of information denial by government agencies on issues of public interest and public concern. This questions the sources of information and news, and it compels journalists to disclose sources with the fear of censoring stories and jailing reporters. So such kind of curbs on freedom of expression, for freedom of free speech on the media in any democratic country is quite unheard of. But in developing countries, this is a greater concern. Now let us look at the media policy and the global perspective. The phrases of media policies according to Dennis McQuail and Jan van Collenberg consists of the first phase, which talked about the emergence of media policies from mid-19th century until the start of the World War II. The second phase comprised of public service media policies during 1945 and 1980. And the third phase was about the new communication paradigm, which started 1980 onwards. So this new communication paradigm talked about all those various things which have to be taken into consideration while bringing about development in the developing economies. Now let us look at the perspective of international bodies. McBride Commission in 1976 recommended the formulation of national and international communication policies in the context of national realities, the free expression of thought, and respect for individual and social rights. UNESCO experts suggested that there were three basic requirements of a nation's communication and media policies. These were, number one, values that determine the structure of communication systems and guide their operations. Number two, the systems of communication, their structures and operation. And number three, the outputs of these systems and their impact on social functions. Now let us analyze what each of them meant. When we say values that determine the structure of communication systems, there have to be a certain value system that any organization abides by. So also every society has certain value systems, certain norms with which it adheres. So there has to be a certain structure of communication system whereby all sorts of follies do not enter the media communication. Then the system of communication, their structures and operation are important. How flawlessly and how smoothly it takes place also brings to light how well media is treated in any kind of a society. The third is the output of these systems as they impact the societal functions in general. So whatever is the produce of the media, it gets into the society by means of being the content of media. So how this media content is impacting the social functions is again important to understand. So this was the perspective of the international bodies such as UNESCO. Now let us look at the essential factors for global need. 1. The political and legal parameters constrict the country's focus on politically and constitutionally sanctioned aspirations and national goals. The range and expense of media available nationally will define its availability in terms of geography and social language, religious and economic groupings of the population in the country. Third, the economics of the media will determine the type, size and design of the media establishment as dictated by the nation's economic and commercial rules and regulations for conducting business in media. So these are a few essential factors which are needed on a global level when it comes to media policy. Now let us look at the diverse patterns of media policy in various countries like the US, Australia, UK, France, Mexico and Ghana. When we talk about the United States of America, the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, was created way back in 1934. It regulates the mass media and telecommunications, including radio, television, satellite, cable, telephone and the internet. But many US magazines, books and recording industries, film and television production studios and cable systems are now also foreign owned. So when there is a greater chance of foreign companies investing into the country, the ownership of media organizations as other organizations gets shared. Every newly established mass media enterprise in the US has to seek a license to start working in the chosen area. It is important to seek license because when you are going to ahead by producing content for the society, that content is directly impacting the people who are consuming that content. So it is important that the player be licensed in the market before entering the market as one of the contenders. Next, let us look at Australia. In Australia, one television station cannot operate in more than 75% of the country's population or area. Not more than 2 licenses are allowed to one person in the same area. One proprietor cannot control a commercial television station, a radio station and a newspaper. So if the owner is there for a TV station, you cannot own a radio station as well as a newspaper. Alternately, if you own a newspaper, you cannot own a radio station or a TV channel. Foreigners are not permitted to control more than 20% of business in one licensed media organization. Now, media as a business is very different from other businesses. So, foreign direct investment was a matter which was largely shared and discussed in the Indian context over a long period of time when we opened up to the new economic policy. But in Australia, we see that only 20% FDI is permissible in businesses in one licensed media organization. There are some other cross-media ownership restrictions along with these few. In the UK, the United Kingdom regulates media through the Ofcom, the Office of Communications, which was created in 2003. The United Kingdom's ownership rules prescribe that in every local area there must be 3 separate media companies for radio, television and newspapers. There is a 20% control limit on ownership in respect of TV, radio and newspaper. Separate conditions apply on television, radio areas covered and on circulation in case of newspapers. So, this is the perspective of England. When we look at France, on the other hand, the Council Supérieur de Audiovisuel regulates the communications industry and also manages the issues of media ownership and concentration. There are 3 conditions on TV industry in France: capital share, number of licenses and audience share, and the number of companies in each media industry. One person cannot own more than 49% of a national TV channel or 33% of a local channel, subject to certain conditions of audience share. For newspapers also, cross ownership is not allowed with more than 2 units of a radio or television, subject to the number of audiences in a particular area. Investment by any non-EU members is restricted to 20% share of the capital of a daily newspaper, television or radio station in the French language. As far as Mexico is concerned, the government is directly involved in regulating broadcast media with some liberal conditions. Most media units in Mexico are commercial and privately owned, including TV and radio. The government issues licenses, but internet and newspapers are not licensed. The government does partially fund a 26-station commercial radio network. Mexican newspapers are guaranteed freedom from government regulations. 2 Mexican agencies administer Media Communication and Transportation Ministry and the Interior Ministry. Now let us look at Ghana. Ghana is more of an underdeveloped nation and it is still struggling with the various aspects of commercialization, business and development areas. The national media policy of Ghana applies on the following mass communication media: 1. Print, 2. Broadcasting and 3. Film. With regard to all the media and media services as public trust, it therefore holds that the public interest shall be paramount in the operations of all media, public, commercial and community. After looking at the media setups and media policies of all these countries, let us look at the expert recommendations in media policies, which is the McBride Commission report. The Commission suggests a completely new development approach to communication policies. It asserted that communication policies must provide for a development of resources needed to satisfy the requirement of the various population sectors: the children, the young workers, the students, the old men and women. The guidelines for media policy provided by them were: 1. To serve the martial national resources. 2. To strengthen the coordination of existing or planned infrastructure. Other guideline was to facilitate rational choices with regard to means. 4th, to develop and satisfy the needs of most disadvantaged sections of the population and to eliminate the most flagrant imbalances. 5th was to emphasize universal and continuing education. 6th was to help in strengthening cultural identity and national independence. And another policy guideline was to enable all countries and all cultures to play a more prominent role in building up of media. Now, if we have to conclude this session, it will be more about the policy which was broadly sketched, the main national and global influences, and the issues and principles that arise from the influences and developments. These include, in addition to the principles of media as a public trust, the freedom and interdependence of media, media pluralism, and universal access. Issues include cultural improvement, marginalization of local languages, education and development of technological competence, human resources, institutional capacity, and public accountability. So those were the various issues that were addressed with respect to media policy. And only so that we can get into the greater details of all these issues, let me explain what each of them stands for. When we say that there are principles that influence the development, including the addition of principles of medias and public trust, it is important that public trust and credibility be created as far as media companies are concerned. Because we all know, with the kind of media environment that is prevalent in the society today, the trust that was available with media of the public has been lost to a greater degree. So we must ensure that public trust is replaced in the principles of media. The freedom and development of media is important in order to promote pluralism and in order to ensure that everyone's opinion gets into the media content. And universal access is again important, because we cannot progress as a country together until and unless all the sections of the society together come up to serve the needs of the nation. The issues like cultural improvement and marginalization of local languages are other things that in any democracy people have to deal with. So when we say marginalization of local languages, local culture is important to preserve and to promote. In order to promote culture, language is important. One cannot marginalize the local languages in order to come together on a national level. Education and development and technological competence is again relevant to the needs of the youngsters of any country, because the better the education system of a country, the better the development. And technological competence is important since it is a global world and we are all connected to each other globally, universally. Human resources are the ones that are finest and maximum in the Indian context. The Indians have the maximum number of their young population. So we must be able to ensure that this younger lot gets some opportunity to prove their mettle, to get employment and to prosper. Institutional capacity and public accountability is again important, because until there is capacity building happening on the institutional level, people in general and on a large scale cannot be brought into the circumference of development. Public accountability is important in a democratic setup, because until we fix accountability, until we fix responsibility, media policies and their making of creation will not be enough to support it. So with this, we end our session on media policy. I hope you found it useful and beneficial. Thank you.